All right, gonna get started here. The slide deck is in the chat. If anyone needs it, give me a shout. Otherwise, just watch along here. So thank you for coming. I know this is maybe not the world's most exciting topic, but I think it's an important one and one that comes up in our strategy planning for sure. But also one that comes up every single day. And we may have touched upon it in many a prioritization discussion in the past couple of weeks. High level, this is going to be slanted towards information security risk, but most of what we're talking about is going to be pretty ambidextrous and applicable to lots of areas in ITS, but you'll notice that slant there for sure. Um, First thing I want to talk about and highlight here is sort of the false equivalency that we all hear all the time of, risk reduction really being at odds with business operations. And that's really not true, that it's really reducing that risk reduction goal and objective to an absurd outcome. Obviously the business needs to operate. So no one is saying that, we should operate with things that are unplugged and things that are not actually usable. Um, so that's really the false equivalency that I want to talk about here. And really what we're aiming for is an alignment, a really tight alignment there where the business as a whole wants to function and wants to be successful. Risk is exactly the measurement of that. We're trying to enable growth and success. Um, that's exactly what we're trying to do here is to limit things that would impact growth and success. So just to make it clear from the get-go that we're speaking the same language here, and these are not really separate things that are conflicting or at odds with each other. Another high level here that often gets overlooked is we are our customers. The business is providing services and solutions to a customer base. Without customers, there is no business. So things that impact our customers and our stakeholders directly are things that impact us directly as well. There really is no distinction and separation there, but between these two things, and we'll see how that plays out in talking about how we approach some of these questions here. High level, one of the things that always comes up is life safety. You always hear life safety is the most important thing. I wanted to break that down and talk about really why is it the most important thing? Um, and it's really important because it's irreversible. So really what we're talking about when we're talking about risks there at that high level point is what can be reversed, what can be repaired, and what can't be repaired at all. So if you imagine that at the college, 1,000 credit cards getting stolen versus one student's mental health portfolio getting stolen, one of those can be repaired. One of those, once the cat's out of the bag, it's never going back in, and can have incredible amounts of irreversible impact for that student, which again is our customer, which is our business. So these are all tied together. Um, I'm not going to talk a huge amount in this presentation about money. A lot of folks will want to translate risk into money and that sort of thing. For me, that all comes down to what can be repaired and reversed and what can't be repaired and reversed. And for our business, we thankfully have a pretty wide berth there of what we can afford to repair and reverse and what we really would cripple our business from a financial perspective. So for the day to day, I don't see that as an important aspect for us to focus on in ITS necessarily. Certainly it is important and has operational impact, but it's not necessarily something that's useful for us in the day-to-day there. What is useful and overlaps with us is we are a Jesuit mission-driven institution. So we have Jesuit ideals, to prioritize the well-being of the individual and things like this. Certainly when it comes to translating risk and impact for our students and our staff and our whole community, these are all in perfect alignment here. So when we do focus on things, like protecting student mental health information and prioritizing that over other needs, such as the 1,000 credit cards, these are all in alignment. They're in alignment with our mission. They're in alignment with the risk to the business. Um, it all makes sense what we choose to prioritize and focus on here for sure. So this is a lot of myth dispelling, but to get into information IT risk specifically now, um, everyone really has a hard focus on data. And for me, that's another myth that I want to dispel is that we're really looking way more holistically at risk than just data risk and data impact. Um, as a residential campus, what we produce in our business is a residential experience for students. Um, Part of that experience is data and having sensitive data and wanting to protect it. Um, but a massive portion of that is having a physical residential presence. And if we couldn't provide that, that would very quickly impact the quality of our experience significantly. Anyone who went through the COVID operations can certainly understand that impact. So, um, on our side, we look at four sort of golden considerations for risk here. You know, all right, we're talking more than just data. What are we talking about here? So we look at four things, and we try to limit it to these four things because for us, we want to keep it simple and applicable. If you get into a giant matrix of possibilities and factors, it's really hard to be nimble and agile. But if you're really just looking at four things in ITS security and ITS risk, um, it's pretty approachable. So, everyone knows the KISS acronym. For us, it's keep information security simple. That's what we're trying to do here. So let's talk about these four things that we can apply to prioritizing and risk ranking what we do. So data classification for sure. That's the easy one. That's the one everyone knows. That's the one everyone focuses on all the time. What we have is a lot of nuance there, especially around data classification. We do have a minimum controls matrix at the bottom of our data classification documents. That's really the meat and potatoes of data risk there. Is breaking it out into those three categories of impact. So beyond that, the next biggest thing is really the network location. And this is one that it sounds very simple in talking at a high level, but it comes up all the time and is one that as a business, we are still very much evolving to understand um, this risk and understand how to mitigate that risk successfully. So for sure, when we're talking about risk, we're talking about likelihood of impact. Um, that's a simple sort of probabilistic equation there. If you think about just the raw numbers there between the internet versus our local network, those are astronomically different. I really should have looked up just how different those are for this presentation. But I'm sure it's several orders of magnitude, times 10, times 10, times 10 difference there. So something that's public facing is a lot more likely to have some kind of event that's happening on it that could impact the service. That might be a cyber event. That might be a flood, a volume denial of service event. Um, that could be any number of things here. But just the raw volume of iterations and things happening there is going to be significantly increased over something that's just local. When we talk about things like DMZs, this is what we're talking about largely. Another one that we're starting to get a little more nuanced here, a little more into the weeds, really is recovery time objective. So you've heard us talk about P1 systems, and what those are, and everyone just sort of has a thought of, oh, it's a critical system, and it's sort of essential for what we're doing. Um, Really, why it's a P1 system and why it's critical and why it's essential is because if the business lost that service, we would want it back ASAP, as quickly as possible. That's the recovery time objective. Um, so that's why we have certain things listed there in a very specific order. Things like the DNS servers that provide basic network functionality, routers, switches, DHCP stuff. Um, these are all the things that we need first in order to provide all of the other services and systems. So that's really what we're talking about with recovery time objective here. You don't need to think about that too heavily. Just know that certain systems are already thought about and already listed as P1 systems. That's why they're P1s. That's why they have a high factor in that likelihood of impact um, equation. Because if they are impacted, that means the whole business is impacted. Nothing is going to start before the P1 systems are online. So that's why we weigh those into our factoring as well. Um, the final sort of cheat code here is audience. This is one that absolutely we could work into our day-to-day discussions and operations here. Something that impacts, the entire campus is a lot higher impact than something that impacts, one person in the corner. This is also where VIP users come into play. Um, we don't prioritize VIP users because they're really cool and we really like them. Um, that might be true, but we prioritize VIP users because they have a huge impact to the community. They're constantly making decisions that widely impact the business and the community, and that's why they're prioritized. Um, Same thing here. If we have something coming through that's really high pressure, high criticality, we really want to look at it and weigh this against all the other things going on, and if we're really just impacting one person versus impacting, an entire class worth of students, that's how we could do this calculus here, to weigh those. So just to bring back really quickly to these are the four sort of keep it simple risk factors that we can look at here. And these should really be weighed very equally. Each one in and of itself is going to dramatically change that likelihood of impact equation. So if we're talking about risk and we're talking about likelihood of impact, we're really talking about these four things largely. Um, for sure, there's other factors, there's other nuance, there's other things that influence that equation. But if we want to keep it simple and keep it agile, these are the four things to look at to figure out that answer. Um, Just checking the chat quick. Everyone seems good. Um, so I do want to also here talk about sort of blind spots in our risk, in our thinking. Um, and one of those blind spots that's a good sort of illustration of thinking about this is thinking about the large distinction we have between tech-dependent folks and non-tech dependent folks. And often we're looking at the tech-dependent folks very closely and very carefully because of the prior four sort of major ways that we look at risk. Um, it's very, very hands-on. But we should also be thinking about risks that can come in through side channels and different opportunities that um, aren't necessarily directly translatable to bits and bytes on the wire. So certainly, physical access comes up a lot. If anyone studies CISSP, there's a huge amount in there that's just about physical access. Why? Why? Because it's tangentially related. Everything that exists in the information sphere exists physically. It's not in some magical world somewhere that's outside of our reality. Physical access is very important to all of those things. For sure, someone, getting accidental access to a P1 system and, dropping their coffee on it is going to be just as bad as, leaving the front door open on the firewall and having a threat actor get in there and do something. So we really need to think about all those possibilities there to avoid any sort of implicit bias in how we approach risk. Last thing I want to talk about here is time. Time impacts this equation in a number of different ways. Um, if you think about the perspective of a threat actor, um, they only need to find one point of entry before they can start cascading and moving laterally and doing all sorts of other things. So if we equate this to Yahtzee, this is the Yahtzee reference. Um, it's like trying to roll snake eyes, So if anyone's ever played Yahtzee or similar games, you get to a point you're like, man, I really got to roll snake eyes to accomplish this goal here. That's just getting two number ones on the dice. Um, that's sort of what we're talking about here is this game. And for us, every hour that goes by is allowing more turns for other players to potentially get their snake eyes on what they're trying to do. Um, Obsolescence also plays another huge role here. Everything in IT is constantly trying to stay ahead and update and be um, up to speed with the latest threats and the latest service requirements and uses and whatnot. As time goes on, the likelihood of that increases dramatically. Things will go out of service. If something goes out of service, that equation of impact is getting enormously higher. Because now not only are you trying to roll snake eyes, but you're trying to get, you know, two of a kind and, flush and all sorts of other things. The possibilities are endless. If we were just trying to roll snake eyes, you can see in the graph below, that's our time plot there. And yeah, initially, a little bit of time doesn't really affect that equation that much. Um, but probability is cumulative there. So if you think about, flipping a coin, yeah, you flip a coin, it's heads or tails, 50%, pretty decent odds there. Um, the odds of flipping a coin 200 times and never getting a heads, nearly impossible. So what this translates to is the most terrifying graph that anyone can look at in IT is that, man, as time goes by, the likelihood of impact grows exponentially, very quickly. So for us, time is not on our side. We absolutely need to be getting ahead of it because every day that we're behind, that's just handing over dice turns to the threat actors, dice turns to the improbable physical events, dice turns to the cosmic rays that are going to come in and flip a bit in the exact wrong way. We're handing all of this over every time that we're letting some risk go on and some risk continue in time. That means that that likelihood of impact is just skyrocketing all along there. That's the gist. I want to keep this really simple. I want to keep this something that, everyone can sort of take some of these factors and think about it in everything you do. This is really on all of us. Risk management is really sort of beyond just business impact. It's really talking about prioritization. What meetings are we calling? What projects are we working on? If we have competing things, because it's all a zero-sum game, which ones are we focusing on? Um, I want this to sort of give the language to a bunch of these concepts that we can all think about together and be on the same page together. If we don't necessarily have words and concepts in common, we're never going to be on the same page there. But hopefully we can think about these four things, think about the broader scope of our business, our Catholic mission, um, inclusion and time, to really focus on what we need to focus on and keep our foot on the gas. 'Cause as soon as we don't, we're gonna be setting up for impact.